Country manager for Euler Hermes in Sweden since 3 years back. I'm also chairman of the board of KFF since about 3 months back. For those of you who know me, you know that I used to consider myself a rock star when I was in my teens. Therefore it feels really good to stand here with a mic and on the stage, so it feels very familiar actually. So next time, Tommy and the guys, we need to sort some smoke machines and some explosions here so we get it working really well. But there is actually a lot of rock and roll in the credit insurance industry these days too. I will talk about that more going forward. But looking back, I don't know about you guys, but for me it's like the older I get, the more I become interested in history. And I thought it could be an interesting starting point to talk a little bit about the history of KFF for those of you who are not acquainted with this association. Basically, I think last year when Henrik was chairman of the association, he started out talking about the association in perspective. We had at the time been around for 4 years. The first chairman was Magnus Lindgren, and Henrik referred to the association then as having gone from being a toddler to sort of a child. And I think it's fair to say now, a couple of years down the road, that we're approaching becoming a teenager, with all what that means. I think we're getting new friends and we're getting new interests and we're sort of developing in an interesting way. I hope it doesn't turn out to be a too obnoxious teenager, but we'll see what happens. But what is clear is that we have achieved a lot in these 4 years, I think. And just to put our efforts into some context, I wanted to share with you what we have achieved, I think. And the first and foremost platform that we have built is a governance structure with very clear roles and responsibilities in it. For those of you who are engaged in the association, and I know that's quite a few of you, you know that we have committees running different areas of responsibility. We have communication, we have education, legal and compliance, and several other areas. And I would encourage everybody who is in the credit insurance industry to actually take part in this. It's a great opportunity to network and get to know the people in the industry. And it also looks very good on your CV, as I always tell my people who work for me, although it's forbidden to leave Euler Hermes, of course, but still, it's something to think of. What we also have done is we've developed a lot of good relationships with various entities that are important to our industry, not least the financial authorities, but also the banking association and other platforms to spread our message around. And I'm particularly pleased actually to see that we have Mr. Hans Lindberg here to present in 15 minutes, coming from the Banking Association. I'm also very pleased to see that there are so many people here today. I think we're actually, it's an all-time high in terms of attendance here today. And I'm particularly pleased to see that we have Anna-Karin Jatko from EKN here. Thank you very much for attending. I know that there was a lot of competition this afternoon actually. There are a couple of events going on in parallel here which also requires good attendance. And I'm also glad to see Karin here, Karin Appelman. Yeah, big hand. Karin was actually And Karin was one of the founders a couple of years back and has been tremendously supportive in making this association grow. So thank you very much for that, Karin. So, I guess, just as a backdrop for those of you who are not familiar with the association, it is a solid mix of players, really. I mean, we have insurance brokers, we have insurance companies, we have government, we have EKN, obviously. And I think, obviously, we have quite different interests and quite different viewpoints. But what unites us is that we all see the tremendous potential for credit insurance in the marketplace. And the agenda that we are all aligned behind is to increase the awareness in the market. I think for those of us who are in the industry, we know that the Swedish marketplace is very much, I often refer to this as the sleeping beauty. Because if you look at other markets, I mean, if you look at Denmark, although I'm conscious that there are vast differences between Denmark and Sweden, their penetration is twice as high as ours. And I see no reason why we should be able to achieve the same levels of penetration in this market too. So, but I want to say that again, I spoke with Carl-Johan about this, Carl-Johan Karlsson earlier. I think we share sort of the same view about what the game changers are for the industry. And to me there are two. It's banks, cooperation with banks. I will get onto that more later on. The second one is SME. If you look at the potential prospect universe, my view is that there are roughly 30,000 credit insurable companies in the market. But we only do, this is actually kind of an embarrassing slide, although we have a good trend in our business, there are only 1,300 clients. So that means a penetration level of close to 4 or 5%, which is nothing. We should be at 10. But you know, I think if we could take it to 5, 6, 7%, that would be a huge leap forward too. So the positive news here is that we do see a growth in the business that we're all in. And speaking of statistics, I also want to share that one of the priorities we have, again, coming back to the priority that the association has to increase the awareness, it is also, to get some awareness, we also need to become interesting. And that is why it's so important for us to build a story around credit insurance. And there are so many good stories to tell. I mean, as we all know, we insure thousands of billions of SEK of export, which creates jobs, which creates wealth, which creates schools, and all these things that we need as a society. So we are actually in the business of doing good for society. And to make ourselves more interesting in the face of the media, what we're working on doing right now, and hopefully within the next month or so, we should be able to present statistics that not only show the number of clients, which in itself is it doesn't say much really, but what we're looking to do is to add also exposure, possibly also premium levels, and possibly also claims, to sort of be able to tell a better story and to put this business into a better context in order to raise the awareness and to get out more often. So one of our speakers today is Henrik Bromeé. I'm very glad to see you here, and that was the first thing I asked Henrik when we met. Can you please help us get an article into Dagens Industri? And I will keep pushing for that, by the way. So.
You remember what I said?
Yeah, well, I forgot. No, but seriously, I think we have a good story to tell as an industry, and we should be proud of what we do. That's the message here. So where are the opportunities? I think there are a lot of opportunities actually. One is driven by regulation, and I know that Hans will talk a little bit about this from a banking point of view. We know that Solvency II, we have an arbitrage opportunity, if you like. Solvency II is a softer framework than Basel III and Basel IV. And that's why I also think that banks are so important. We see, at least from my point of view, to me it's clear that there is a global trend that banks are mitigating risk from their own books to credit insurance. And I would be surprised if that trend doesn't hit Sweden within the next weeks, hopefully. But seriously, as soon as possible. But it is a great opportunity for us as an industry. I talked about SME, huge opportunity. I mean, just look at the numbers. We have, as an industry, we've got 1,300 clients, and there should be 30,000. I mean, if there are 30,000 prospects, you know, doubling that shouldn't be too difficult, really. So that's also a great opportunity for us, I think. Also, I think we have an interesting macroeconomic situation. Although we have growth in the global economy, it's quite tepid. Tepid means ljummen in Swedish, by the way. You know, I think we've had one of my favorite forecasters is a guy who unfortunately passed away quite recently, a guy called Lennart Israelsson. Those of you who are Swedes know that he's known as Axel Stinsen, a legendary guy who, what he did was basically, he started out working as a stins, basically as a train, what's the English term? Train conductor? No, stins. Obviously not making a fortune, but what he did, he came from this region of Småland where people are known to be quite cheap. So he didn't want to spend any money. What he did was, he started buying shares because he was so afraid of inflation, which was very much on the agenda at the time. This was back in the 50s after World War II and all that. We had high inflation at the time. So he was so afraid to see his money lose value, so he figured that stocks could be a good mitigator for inflation. So he started buying shares, and as he got interest, dividends on those, he continued to buy new shares, etc. Exactly like Warren Buffett and others do. So as a value investor, he died a couple of months ago only, leaving behind a fortune of 200 million SEK. 20 million euros in stocks, and that's amazing, I think. And what he said was that you always have 5 good years and 2 bad years, always 5 good years. And if you look at it historically, that's more or less true, although we have now had 7 or 8 good years. So my take on that is we are on overtime, and we should actually start to see some adjustments in the economy. That's my personal view, I should say. Monetary policy is extremely interesting also from our industry. We all know that we've been having extremely loose monetary policy across the Western world for a very long time. Reflation is on the agenda. It's basically sort of an adjusted inflation, you can say. price increases are starting to come back to normal. And once that happens, at least in economic theory, that should mean increased interest rates. And increased interest rates should, in theory, mean more bankruptcies, more expensive financing. So that also leads to more insolvencies. So although I'm painting a sort of a gloomy picture here, it's great news for the credit insurance business. So it's actually quite positive in that sense. So we have an opportunity. But I think as an association, coming back to what we should be focusing on, again, if you look at the spread of members that we have in different interests and all that, we need to align on a couple of initiatives. I mean, we all do this, none of us get paid to do this. We all do this on our spare time and driven by our desire to do well, I guess, and to develop the industry. So we need to focus. We don't have that much resources, so we need to focus on a couple of things. And the priority areas for this year that we have agreed on is first of all media, and that ties in very nicely, obviously, with the overall ambition of increasing the awareness. And again, we do have a great story to tell. We just need to be able to capture it and build it in a nice way. Cooperation is extremely important also. I mean, Sweden, for those of you who are non-Swedes, you will know that Sweden is known to be a country with successful cooperation throughout history. And the reason for that, I think, is partly because we're so small, so we have to cooperate. And the same is true for the credit insurance industry. We're really small, so we really have to cooperate. And the way I see it, one important area is the cooperation between the private sector and the government sector. There we can do a lot, I think. I also touched upon it before, banks. I won't repeat myself, but banks, to me, is the main game changer for this industry. And just to scare you up a little bit, I think this is a picture from our own Euler Hermes economic research department. But the reason I'm showing this is just to put the economy into perspective. Things are actually very wobbly if you look at it. If you look at 2016 in review, we started out with the stock market crash in China. We had oil prices wobbling all throughout the year, although they have stabilized now to some extent at least. We had an impeachment of the Brazilian president. We had the Brexit, obviously, which I think in itself is such an important event. I mean, if you look at it from a Swedish standpoint, UK is our fourth largest trading partner. What happened immediately after the referendum was that the pound depreciated by almost 20%. It has recovered a bit since, but it's still 10-15% cheaper than it used to be. I mean, although a lot of the Swedish exporters are on currency insurance, those currency insurance will expire, and at that point of time, all other things being equal, there will be a price drop and less revenue. So that's just one example, and we also see, things are starting to happen for real now in the UK. So I think we've only seen the start here. Turkey's failed coup, you of course remember that. Nobody forgets Trump. I know that Henrik Bromeé will talk more about Donald Trump going forward, but obviously also a key event. We had an OPEC decision to cut oil production, and more importantly also, the Federal Reserve raised the interest rates for the first time in many, many years. So again, it would seem as if things are changing to me. And all of us who follow the news obviously know we had an election in France, and the final election is coming up. There is a lot of instability out there. So, in other words, very good news for our industry. And I think it took me 15 minutes to produce this slide. I'm very proud of it. But I think, just to summarize, credit insurance has long been in the dark, but it's now time to glow. So, against that backdrop, I'm very pleased to inform you that we have a fantastic agenda for today. What's going to happen is, when I'm done with this little speech, I will hand over to Mr. Hans Lindberg, the MD of the Banking Association. We will then do a short break at 4 o'clock for a cup of coffee. Then we have another distinguished speaker with us, Mr. Mike Holly, CEO of Equinox, who will talk us through growth in Sweden and a couple of local perspectives on credit insurance. Then we have Henrik Mittelman to talk a little bit about from Trump to triumph. I look forward to this session too. So it's going to be partly macro, partly micro, a little bit of everything. So it's going to be good fun. And then the drinking starts at seriously. But then we have the reception where there will be wine and some light food to be served. So that's a great opportunity to network a little bit and to get to know each other there. So that is the plan for the day. So against this backdrop,